the main takeaway here, and this is what I keep coming back to, is the fundamental shift in how we perceive value in the digital age.
Yeah.
It's not about scarcity anymore.
No.
The snow had been falling since 3 in the morning. By the time Daniel Harper stepped into his garage at 7:30, the main street of Everbrook was buried under 6 inches of white silence. The kind of silence that makes a small town feel like the last place on earth, which, depending on who you asked, it was. Daniel didn't mind the quiet. He'd built his life inside it. He was crouched under the hood of a 1998 Ford pickup owned by Chester Nolan, his neighbor and one of his most loyal customers. The truck's fuel injector had been misfiring for 3 weeks. Chester had been patient. Daniel was almost done. That's when the sound came, not the rumble of Chester's pickup. The kind of engine note that doesn't belong on a road like Beaumont Lane, where the asphalt buckles in spring and the street signs are crooked from a storm 2 winters back that nobody got around to fixing. Daniel straightened up slowly, wiping his hands on a rag that had long since stopped being useful for wiping anything. He watched the car coast into the gravel lot in front of his bay doors. It was a Porsche 911 Turbo S, painted in a color called Carrara White Metallic, that probably had its own entry in a catalog somewhere. The car settled into the uneven gravel with a dignified hiss of its air suspension, clearly offended by the terrain. The man who stepped out looked like he had been assembled by a team of professionals. He was tall, somewhere in his mid-50s, with silver hair swept back from his temples and a cashmere overcoat that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly rent. He looked around the garage at the hand-painted sign above the bay door. The stack of used tires against the fence, the collection of mismatched mugs on the window ledge, and his expression settled into something between amusement and contempt. He pulled out his phone, took a photo of the sign. Then he laughed. It was a short, private laugh, the kind people make when they're confirming a suspicion they already had about the world. Daniel watched him, said nothing. He would think about that laugh for a long time afterward. Not with anger. Anger requires investment, and Daniel had learned to be careful with his investments. He thought about it the way you think about a detail in an engine schematic that doesn't quite fit. You set it aside, you keep working, and eventually the answer comes to you. It took exactly 19 hours. Everbrook, Vermont, is the kind of town that appears in exactly one travel magazine per decade, usually in a sidebar about hidden gems of New England, and then is promptly forgotten again. Population, 4,200. 1 diner, 1 post office, 1 pharmacy that doubles as a gift shop in the weeks before Christmas, a covered bridge that was photographed so often by leaf peepers in October that the town had quietly installed a turnout on the shoulder of Route 9 just to reduce the traffic accidents. Daniel Harper had lived there for 17 years. He'd arrived in a second-hand Honda with a 7-month-old daughter in the back seat, and enough money to cover 3 months of rent on the apartment above what would become his garage. He'd chosen Everbrook almost by accident, a thumb on a map, a coin flip, a moment of choosing movement over stillness, when stillness felt too much like giving up. The garage had belonged to a retired mechanic named Earl Breckenridge, who'd sold Daniel the lease and most of the equipment for a price that was more generosity than commerce. Earl had seen something in Daniel that Daniel himself was still trying to name. Maybe it was the way he'd looked at the engine diagnostic machine in the corner, not with the cautious respect of someone learning a trade, but with the quiet recognition of someone meeting an old friend. The apartment above the garage was small. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a window that faced the parking lot, a bathroom with pipes that sang in cold weather. Daniel had painted Lily's room yellow when she was 3. He'd never gotten around to repainting his own. Lily was now 17, and she had her mother's eyes dark brown, wide-set, capable of conveying 17 distinct emotional states with almost no movement of the surrounding musculature. She had Daniel's hands, long fingers, wide palms, the kind of hands that seemed built for making things. She was sitting at the kitchen table when Daniel came upstairs at lunchtime, a calculus textbook open in front of her and a bowl of cereal going soft beside it. She was doing neither calculus nor eating. She was staring at something on her laptop screen with the focused stillness of someone encountering a problem she has not yet decided how to approach. "Dad," she said, without looking up, "who was that guy this morning? The one with the Porsche?" Daniel poured himself a glass of water. "Don't know his name yet. He's coming back at 4 for the car. He was rude to you. He didn't say anything to me. That's what I mean." She finally looked up. "He took a photo of your sign and laughed." Daniel leaned against the counter. "People laugh at things they don't understand. That's not what you think. That's what you say." He looked at her. Sometimes the accuracy of her observations still caught him off guard, even after 17 years. "Go eat something that isn't that cereal," he said. "It's been in the bowl for 40 minutes. She closed the laptop. "I was reading about the new thermal efficiency studies from the SAE conference, the ones Dr. Patricia Hale presented last month. And? She's close. She's missing something in the combustion chamber geometry. It's the same thing you wrote about in the blue notebook, the one from 2019. Daniel said nothing. "You should send her a letter," Lily said. "Eat your lunch," Daniel said, and went back downstairs. The blue notebook was one of 14. They lived in a wooden crate under Daniel's workbench, between a box of torque wrenches and a coffee can full of miscellaneous bolts he kept meaning to sort. The notebooks had no particular system. They'd been filled in order of availability, whichever one was closest when an idea came. Some were standard composition books. 2 were the kind with grid paper that architects use. 1 was a child's notebook, the kind with a cartoon rocket on the cover, that Lily had given him when she was 8 because she'd run out of her own. The ideas inside were not children's ideas. Daniel had studied mechanical engineering at the University of Vermont for 3.5 years before he stopped. He'd been, by most accounts, the best student in his cohort. His thesis advisor, a careful and undemonstrative man named Professor Walter Okafor, had once told a colleague in confidence, though the colleague was not particularly good at confidences, that Daniel had the kind of intuition that cannot be taught and is almost never seen. Then Rachel died. She had been 26 years old, healthy, laughing at a joke Daniel had made about hospital parking rates. And then she was not any of those things. A pulmonary embolism, sudden and complete, 41 hours after Lily was born. The doctors were sorry. The paperwork was extensive. The bill was something Daniel spent the next 4 years paying off. He never went back to finish the degree. He'd told himself it was practical, someone had to care for the baby, and he had no family nearby, and the money from the garage was real in a way that academic ambitions suddenly were not. But the notebooks told a different story. Every idea he'd had to set aside, every calculation he'd been unable to pursue in the daylight hours of being a father and a mechanic and a small business owner, he put them there. In pencil, mostly. Sometimes in the 3 a.m. dark, with Lily asleep in her yellow room, he would work through a problem with the focused intensity of a man who knows his time is borrowed. The work was good. He knew this not from vanity, but from the simple fact that the math checked out, again and again, when he came back to it months later. What he had built, across 14 notebooks and 17 years, was something between a research journal and an engineering manifesto. A comprehensive rethinking of internal combustion, thermal efficiency, focused on the geometry of combustion chamber design and the behavior of heat energy at the moment of peak cylinder pressure. It was not, strictly speaking, a new engine. It was something more precise than that, a new understanding of the space inside an engine, where the most important things happen. He had never shown it to anyone except Lily. Lily had read all 14 notebooks by the time she was 15. Her response had been characteristically precise. "Dad, this is either wrong or it's going to be in a textbook someday. I don't think it's wrong." His name was Robert Calloway. Daniel found this out at 4 o'clock, when Robert returned for his car 40 minutes late, which he did not acknowledge, accompanied by a young woman in a dark blazer who introduced herself as his executive assistant, though she said it in a tone that suggested the word executive was doing very significant lifting in that sentence. Robert Calloway was the founder and CEO of Callaway Velocity Group, a company that had made its first fortune in performance parts distribution and its second in automotive technology licensing. He had a biography on a business website that used the phrase visionary disruptor 3 times in 4 paragraphs. He had been on the cover of a trade magazine the previous spring under the headline, "The Man Who Knows Where Engines Are Going." Daniel did not know any of this yet. He simply knew that the Porsche had an intermittent fault in its variable valve timing system, a software calibration issue, compounded by a worn actuator solenoid, and that he had fixed it. "It's ready," Daniel said, when Robert came through the bay door. Robert looked at the car, then at Daniel, then around the garage with the same surveying expression he'd had that morning. What was wrong with it? Daniel explained the fault clearly and without embellishment. The variable valve timing actuator, the calibration drift, the specific RPM range where the hesitation occurred, the solution. Robert listened with the partial attention of someone accustomed to receiving information they expect to have simplified for them. When Daniel finished, Robert said, "My dealer in Burlington couldn't diagnose it in 2 visits." "I know," Daniel said. "The fault code is generic. You have to listen to the engine." There was a pause. "How much?" Robert said. Daniel gave him the figure. It was a fair price, slightly below what a Burlington dealer would charge, significantly below what a Porsche specialist in Boston would charge. Robert looked at the number on the invoice with the expression of a man confronting something that doesn't match his existing categories. Then his eyes moved to the workbench. The blue notebook was sitting there, open to a page of combustion chamber diagrams. Daniel had been working on a new calculation the previous night and had left it out by accident. Robert picked it up before Daniel could say anything. He looked at the first open page for perhaps 3 seconds. Then he turned a few more pages, slowly. His expression shifted, but not toward the recognition Daniel might have hoped for. What arrived on Robert Calloway's face was something closer to performance. The exaggerated bemusement of a man playing a role he's enjoyed before. He held the notebook up toward his assistant. "Would you look at this?" he said. He was smiling. "Our mechanic is designing engines." The assistant made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was clearly intended to function as one. Robert set the notebook down, not back where he'd found it, but on the corner of the workbench at an angle, the way people set things when they're finished with them rather than where they belong. He took out his phone. He took a photograph of the open page. "Keep dreaming," he said pleasantly, and walked to his car. The Porsche pulled out of the gravel lot with that same precise engine note. Then it was gone. Daniel stood in the middle of his garage for a long moment. The fluorescent light above the second bay had been flickering for 2 weeks. It flickered now. He walked to the workbench and moved the notebook back to its proper place. He closed it. He put it in the crate. Then he picked up a wrench and went back to work. Lily heard about the notebook at dinner. She was quiet for a moment, the particular quality of quiet that preceded her most careful responses. "He photographed it," she said. "Yes, and posted it somewhere." "I assume so. He had the manner of someone who posts things." Lily considered this. "Does it bother you?" Daniel ate a forkful of the pasta she'd made. She had recently developed an interest in cooking with more ambition than his own, and thought about the question honestly. "Not the way you think," he said. "The work is the work. Whether someone photographs it and makes fun of it doesn't change what it is. But someone might actually look at it," Lily said. "Someone might. Someone might understand what they're looking at. That's also possible." She pushed her food around her plate. "Are you worried about that?" "No," Daniel said. And he meant it. Not because he was incurious about the outcome, but because he had spent 17 years making peace with the distance between what he knew he was capable of and what the world currently understood him to be. The worry was on the other side of that distance, and he'd learned not to live there. They finished dinner. Lily washed up. Daniel sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee and the latest issue of an SAE technical journal he subscribed to under a P.O. box address, a habit he'd started years ago without being entirely sure why. At 9:15, Lily came and sat across from him. "Dr. Marcus Webb called," she said. Daniel looked up. "On the shop phone, while you were in the back." She paused. "He's the chief engineer at Ferrari Motorworks, the American division." Daniel set down the journal. He said he'd seen a photograph online. He said he needed to speak with Daniel Harper at Harper Automotive in Everbrook, Vermont. Lily was watching him carefully. He sounded like someone who was trying very hard to sound calm. Daniel called Marcus Webb back at 7 the next morning, from the shop phone, while coffee brewed on the windowsill. Webb answered before the second ring. "Mr. Harper." His voice was measured, professional, and underneath both of those things, genuinely tense in the way that engineers get tense when they're standing very close to something important. "Thank you for calling. I want to be precise about why I'm reaching out, because I think imprecision would be disrespectful to both of us." "All right," Daniel said. "A photograph of an open notebook was shared publicly yesterday by a Robert Calloway. I assume you know this." "I do. I saw it because someone in our engineering department forwarded it to me as a joke. That was their frame for it. It was not my frame for it." A pause. "I spent 4 hours last night working through what was visible in the photograph. I have several questions about the combustion chamber geometry in the diagram on the left side of the page, but I believe I understand the theoretical basis of what I'm looking at. And if I'm correct in that understanding, then what you've designed represents a genuinely significant advance in thermal efficiency modeling." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "What made you look past the first impression?" he asked. Webb was quiet for a moment too. "The notation," he said. "Most people who aren't engineers but want to appear to be, they use standard textbook notation. Yours doesn't. It's modified in specific ways that only make sense if you've actually worked through the math and found the standard notation insufficient. That's not something you can fake." Another pause. "How long have you been working on this?" 17 years, Daniel said. The line was silent for long enough that Daniel thought for a moment the connection had dropped. 17 years, Webb repeated. He did not say it with pity or with excitement. He said it with the careful recognition of someone recalibrating a very large estimate. "Mr. Harper, I'd like to come to Everbrook. With a small team. I'd like to see the notebooks." "All of them?" Daniel said. "How many are there?" 14. Another silence. "Then yes," said Marcus Webb. "All of them." The team from Ferrari Motorworks arrived on a Thursday. There were 4 of them. Webb himself, a thermal systems engineer named Dr. Constance Adler, who had done her doctoral work at Carnegie Mellon, a young engineer named Tyler Osei, who said very little but filled 3 legal pads with notes in the first hour, and a patents attorney named Sylvia Brand, who sat in a corner and read documents with the focused intensity of someone diffusing something. They set up at the 2 long tables in Daniel's back room, the one he used for paperwork and storage, which he'd cleared of invoices and parts catalogs the night before. They worked in sessions of 3 and 4 hours, with breaks for coffee. Daniel answered questions. He walked them through the evolution of his ideas across the 14 notebooks, from the early tentative calculations to the refined models of the last few years. Constance Adler asked the best questions. She had a way of approaching a calculation from an unexpected angle, not to challenge it, but to see what it looked like from the side that Daniel recognized and respected. On the second day, she arrived with 6 pages of her own calculations based on his models, and they spent 2 hours in a discussion that was, by some distance, the best professional conversation Daniel had ever had. "You worked this out alone," she said at one point. "Not a question." "With my daughter looking over my shoulder," Daniel said. "How old is she?" 17. Constance looked at the notebook in front of her, then at Daniel. "She's seen all of these?" She's read them more carefully than I have. What does she want to study? Mechanical engineering. She applied to 3 schools. Which 3? MIT, Georgia Tech, and the University of Michigan. Constance was quiet for a moment. Tell her to look at Ferretti's graduate fellowship program when the time comes. On the 3rd day, Sylvia Brand put down her documents and joined the technical discussions for the first time. She asked Daniel 3 specific questions about the origins of his designs, the dates of his earliest calculations, and whether he had ever shared the work in any form with any third party. When he'd answered all 3, she nodded once in a way that appeared to conclude something. "We'll need to file provisional patent applications," she said. "Multiple claims across the main design and the subsidiary thermal modeling work. Your name as sole inventor. I'd recommend moving quickly." "Why quickly?" Daniel asked. Sylvia glanced at Webb. Something passed between them. "Because," Webb said carefully, "there are at least 2 other companies that have been working toward something adjacent to this. But the photograph has been visible for 3 days now, and people in this industry pay attention to things like that." He met Daniel's eyes. "You've been working on this for 17 years, Mr. Harper. We'd like to make sure it stays yours." The post had been up for 60 hours before Robert Calloway began to understand that something had gone wrong. He'd shared it on his professional account, the one with the header photo of him beside a race car in Monaco, with the caption, "Stopped at a garage in the middle of nowhere today. Found this on the workbench. The town mechanic is apparently also a rocket scientist. Keep dreaming, friend." He'd tagged it under his usual automotive content and thought nothing more of it. The initial response was what he'd expected. A few dozen comments from his followers, mostly amused. A couple of industry contacts who recognized the genre of the joke. Then, Tyler Osei, who was 26 years old and had the particular fearlessness of someone who doesn't yet know what can't be said in professional contexts, shared the original post from his personal account with the comment, "This is actually extraordinary work, and the person who posted this as a joke should be embarrassed." Tyler had 300 followers. Most of them were engineers. Engineers talked to other engineers. By the end of the 2nd day, 3 separate technical discussions had started in specialist forums, real discussions, with actual analysis about the combustion chamber diagrams visible in the photograph. The consensus was building toward something, that the notation was original. The geometry was non-standard in ways that were sophisticated rather than ignorant, and that whoever had drawn this had either made a significant error or a significant discovery. No one was betting on the significant error. Robert Calloway received a call on Friday afternoon from a journalist at a major automotive trade publication who was, the journalist said pleasantly, "just following up on a story I'm developing about an independent engineer in Vermont." The journalist wanted to know if Robert could confirm when and where he'd taken the photograph. Robert said he'd call back. Then he called his communications director. Then he called his attorney. His attorney, a brisk woman named Helena Cross, who had worked with Robert for 11 years and had long since stopped being surprised by him, listened to his account and was quiet for a moment. "You took a photograph of someone's proprietary engineering work," she said, "and posted it publicly while mocking the person who created it. I didn't know it was. That is not, currently, your most pressing problem. Your most pressing problem is that Ferretti Motor Works has apparently been at his garage for 3 days and their patents team is now involved." A pause. "Robert." You handed them a map. The Detroit Automotive Technology Summit happened every October in a convention center beside the river with glass walls that turned amber in the afternoon light. It was not the largest automotive event of the year, but it was, by general agreement, the most substantive. Fewer spectacles, more engineers. The kind of conference where things actually got decided. Daniel had never attended. He'd read the proceedings every year, available online 3 months after the fact, and had occasionally composed letters to presenters that he never sent. This year, he was standing at the back of the main hall, watching a stage he'd last seen in a photograph in a trade journal, waiting for a presentation he'd been asked not to discuss with anyone before it happened. Lily was beside him. She was wearing a jacket she'd bought for her college interviews, navy, structured, slightly too large at the shoulders in a way she'd decided to keep because it made her look, she said, like someone who hadn't quite grown into herself yet, which felt accurate. She had been accepted to MIT. The letter had arrived the previous week. Daniel had read it twice, standing at the kitchen table, before going back downstairs to finish a brake job on the Volvo belonging to Margaret and Gordon Fairfield from 2 streets over. On the stage, Marcus Webb was walking the audience through the development history of what he was calling the Harper Thermal Efficiency Architecture. The slides showed the evolution of the design. The early diagrams from 2008, the increasingly refined models of the middle years, the complete framework as it currently existed. He explained what the architecture proposed and what the implications were for combustion engine efficiency, particularly in the context of hybrid systems where the thermal behavior of the combustion component had outsized effects on overall energy recovery. He cited preliminary simulation results. He cited the provisional patent filings. He named the inventor. Daniel Harper, Webb said, is a mechanical engineer and the owner of Harper Automotive in Everbrook, Vermont. He developed this architecture over 17 years while running a one-man repair shop and raising a daughter. He did not publish, did not present, and did not seek recognition. The audience was quiet in the attentive way of people who are revising their understanding of something. He is here today, Webb said, and I would like to ask him to join me. Daniel walked to the stage. He was aware of the room in the peripheral way of someone who has spent most of his life working in small, enclosed spaces and was not entirely sure what to do with a large, open one. He shook Webb's hand. He stood at the lectern. He said, "Thank you for your attention. I'm happy to take questions about the technical work. I am less comfortable with questions about anything else, so I'll ask your patience with that." There was a moment. Then the room began to applaud. At a table on the left side of the hall, Robert Calloway sat with a glass of water he had not touched. He had known Daniel would be here. Helena had told him as much 2 days ago, in a conversation he did not enjoy, but knowledge had not fully prepared him for the image on the stage. The mechanic from Everbrook in a pressed shirt, standing at a lectern in front of 400 engineers, being applauded. Robert had considered not coming. Helena had advised him to come. "It will look worse if you're absent," she'd said. "At least if you're here, you can be visible and composed." He was trying. The questions session lasted 40 minutes. The questions were technical, specific, and serious, and Daniel answered them with the same directness he used when explaining a repair to a customer. "Here is what I found. Here is why I believe it. Here is what I don't yet know." Constance Adler asked 2 of the questions from the floor and got answers that made her write 3 lines in her notebook immediately afterward. When it was over, Daniel came down from the stage into a corridor of engineers who wanted to continue the conversation. He moved through it with a kind of careful courtesy. He was genuinely interested in what they had to say. But he was also keeping one eye on the hall entrance, where he'd told Lily to wait. She was not waiting. She was 20 feet away, in an animated conversation with a tall woman in a green blazer whom Daniel did not recognize. When Lily saw him looking, she waved him over. "This is Dr. Nadia Petrov," Lily said. "She runs the graduate programs at Georgia Tech's School of Mechanical Engineering." Dr. Petrov shook Daniel's hand. "Your daughter," she said, "has been explaining to me that she's applied to your school's competing program at MIT. "She has," Daniel said. "She also explained, in some detail, why she believes the combustion chamber geometry in your 2019 notebooks represents a more elegant solution than the one you published today, and that she has a modification that addresses the thermal boundary layer issue at high RPM." Dr. Petrov looked at Lily with the expression of someone who had not expected this conversation and was now not willing to have any other. "I'd like to hear more about that modification. I've written it up," Lily said. She had, in fact, written it up. Daniel had seen her working on it for weeks. At the kitchen table, in her school notebooks, in the margins of the SAE journals she'd borrowed from his subscription. "I can send it to you tonight." "Please," said Dr. Petrov. Robert Calloway had been making his way toward the exit when he came within earshot of this exchange. He stopped. The crowd around him continued to move. He stood in it like a post. He had prepared, in the days since Helena's call, a version of a response, an acknowledgement that he hadn't understood what he was looking at, a carefully worded expression of admiration for Daniel's work. Possibly a handshake. He'd rehearsed it. It had seemed adequate in the rehearsal. It did not seem adequate now. He stood there for a moment, watching Daniel Harper speak to the engineers around him with the unhurried confidence of someone who has known, for a very long time, exactly what the work was worth and who had been willing to wait for the world to figure it out. Then he went to find his car. The drive back to Everbrook took 4 hours in good traffic. Daniel drove his own truck, a 12-year-old Silverado he kept in excellent mechanical condition, which he considered a matter of professional honor. And Lily sat in the passenger seat, with her feet on the dashboard and a legal pad on her knees, working on the modification document for Dr. Petrov. They didn't talk much. They'd never needed to, over long distances. "Somewhere north of Montpelier," Lily said. "Webb offered you the consulting arrangement." "Yes. Are you going to take it?" "Part of it," Daniel said. "The research advisory role, not the relocation. You want to stay in Everbrook." "I have a garage to run." Lily was quiet for a moment. Chester Nolan's truck, Daniel agreed. "And the Fairfield Volvo. And I promised Martin G. I'd look at his snowblower before the next storm. You could get someone else to do those things." "I could," Daniel said. "But then they wouldn't get done right." She went back to her legal pad. The highway curved north through hills that were dark green and then sudden orange, and then dark again in the late light. The heater made a small sound. The Silverado's engine ran with the smooth quiet of a machine that had been carefully maintained. "I got an email from MIT's financial aid office," Lily said, not looking up. "They've offered a package that covers most of it." "I know. I saw the forwarded confirmation. With the Ferrari Fellowship." "Lily, I'm just saying, with the Ferrari Fellowship application, the total gap would be—" "Lily?" He glanced at her. "I know. I've done the math." She was quiet for a moment. "Of course you have. Go back to your paper." She went back to her paper. They got home at 9:30. The snow had started again light. Early season. The kind that doesn't stick yet, but promises something. The garage sat at the end of Beaumont Lane, with its hand-painted sign and its bay doors closed against the cold, and the light in the upstairs apartment window made a yellow square in the dark. Daniel parked the truck. He sat for a moment with the engine off, looking at the place he'd built 17 years ago from a lease and a used set of equipment and the decision to keep going. Lily had already gotten out and was heading for the stairs. Legal pad under her arm, keys in her hand. "Dad," she said, without turning around. "Yeah, the work was always real, even when no one else knew it." She went inside. Daniel sat in the truck for another moment. He thought about the first time he'd driven into Everbrook, 17 years ago, with Lily asleep in her car seat and the Honda making a small complaint from the front passenger wheel that he'd diagnosed and fixed the following morning. He thought about the first morning he'd unlocked the garage, Earl Breckenridge standing beside him, saying nothing, just handing over the key. He thought about the blue notebook, the first diagram he'd drawn in it, tentative and exploratory, not yet sure if it was going anywhere, only sure that the question was worth asking. The question had always been the same one that drives all good engineering. What is actually happening in there, and can we do it better? He had spent 17 years answering it. He would spend however many years remained answering the next version of it. That was the work. It had never required an audience. An audience had simply turned out to be one of the things that arrived. Eventually, when you did the work long enough and well enough and without letting anyone talk you out of it. Through the windshield, the early snow fell through the cone of the parking lot light, each flake visible for a moment, and then gone into the dark. He got out. He unlocked the bay door. He turned on the fluorescent light, the one that had been flickering for 2 weeks, and it came on steady and clear. Tomorrow, Chester Nolan was coming in for his fuel injector follow-up. The Fairfield Volvo needed a wheel bearing looked at. Martin G's snowblower was waiting in the back corner, covered with a tarp, patient as everything in Everbrook tended to be. Daniel picked up his wrench. He went to work. The provisional patents were granted in stages across 4 months, covering 11 distinct claims under the Harper thermal efficiency architecture. The engineering press covered it carefully and, for the most part, accurately, which was more than could be said for some of the other coverage, which tended toward narrative framings that Daniel found excessive and that Lily found, in her words, impressionistically correct but mechanically lazy. Ferrari Motorworks began incorporating elements of the architecture into their hybrid powertrain development program. 2 other manufacturers, one German, one Japanese, entered licensing discussions in the spring. Constance Adler co-authored a paper with Daniel that was submitted to the SAE Journal and accepted for publication with minor revisions. Lily Harper enrolled at MIT in September. She was studying mechanical engineering with a concentration in thermal systems. In her second week, a professor named Dr. Raymond Chu assigned a paper on thermal efficiency modeling. In the bibliography, he included a preprint of a Ferrari technical document. The lead contributor was listed as D. Harper. Lily did not mention to Dr. Chu that she knew the lead contributor. She simply wrote the paper, cited the document, and earned a grade that Dr. Chu described in his comments as exceptional, particularly the section on boundary layer behavior at high RPM, which goes considerably beyond the source material. She sent her father a photograph of the comment. He read it once, at the kitchen table, and then went back downstairs to finish the inspection on a '09 Subaru Forester belonging to a young woman who'd just moved to Everbrook and didn't know yet who she was dealing with. He would find out, in time. They always did.